Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Library Access, a Keyforge podcast brought to you by thekeyforge.com. Like always, I'm Nick. I'm here with Alex.
Hey, what's up?
And Steven.
How's it going, everybody?
Like we mentioned before, our Patreon is live at patreon.com/thekeyforge. If you like what we do and you want to see more of it, feel free to drop $1 in our tip jar. It's been an exciting week for Keyforge. Maybe give or take a couple days. I think we're a little late on the news, but there was a pretty significant rules update released, which addressed a lot of, I don't know if you'd call it controversial, but a lot of hot topic cards and mechanics and all that. I trust that you guys have heard all about it, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. I have a big list here of the kind of a summary, and I won't read it all, but I think we should touch on a couple of them for sure. Yeah, I think the most significant one, correct me if there's a more interesting one, but Biometrics backup, which is I should have had Biometrics backup, the card pulled up already to read what it actually says, because everything that references reads like the new definition-ish of it. But the original card says, it's an upgrade, a Mars upgrade, that says, this creature gains destroyed. You may put this creature into its owner's archives. And up until now, I guess it's based on how the rules are written, or maybe it's just because of the way all the other mechanics work in the game. But it was perceived or argued that it was the attacker who got to decide how that card resolved. You know, you may put this creature into its owner's archive. So if you're attacking your opponent who has added that upgrade to their own card, you as the attacker gets to decide what happens to that card. And I think the majority of people really disagreed with that. I mean, they accepted it, but I think the only people that really fought for that stance were just, I don't know if you'd call them trolls, but just kind of those kinds of people who just wanted to be conflicting or controversial or whatever. But anyway, now it says this creature it essentially says this creature gains destroyed, put this creature into its owner's archives. And actually, is that exactly what it says? I'm reading a summary.
Yeah, the old card was that you may put this creature into its owner's archives. And since it was being activated on the opponent's turn, they had the choice on may. The errata just takes out the may part. It just goes, destroyed, put this creature into its owner's archives, period.
Interesting. I actually... Interesting. That's a different interpretation than I had walked away from it with the first time I got that. I see it right here in the official rule book. That's exactly what it says. I thought the emphasis was more on the you, and I thought it still allowed the owner may put this card in its owner's archives. But I guess for the sake of keeping the game with no interrupts, anything like that, they changed it like that, which is a super significant change.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
What I thought it was just being, just kind of clarifying that it's the person who plays this card gets to decide. That's not a big, shift in the I don't know, the rules of the game. It didn't drastically change it, but now it's a card that says one thing and means something completely different.
Yeah, it originally was meant to. Brett Anders came out and said no, this card is not working as intended. So I'm glad they fixed it. But yeah, because there is no interaction when it's not your turn, the opponent, even though you put the card down, your opponent has a choice because it's their turn. So now with the new clarification, it just goes, it is now in your archives, period, done, nothing fancy. That way it's keeping within the terms of the rules.
Let me ask you guys a quick question related to that, because I think it's super significant that this is the first real errata that we've seen. We've seen tons of rules clarifications and them saying this word, is more important than this word. So if there's two conflicting things, then, this one takes precedence, etc. But the first time we've actually say, no, this is a mistake and future printings will presumably have this fixed. Is there any scenario you can imagine where you would not want, if you had placed Biometrics backup onto a card, it to go into your archives or the owner's archives?
I can't think of the name of the card, but there's a Sanctum card that does it, and there's a Mars card that does it, and it would be super applicable in this scenario where you reap and you take an opponent's creature and put it into your archive. And when you pull your archive, it goes back into their hand, I think.
Yeah. Whenever you access your archive, if there's any of your opponent's cards go back to their hand, just as you would get your cards back.
So I guess if you're playing like a high cycle deck, you might want it to go to your discard because there's a better chance of you getting it back than where you've got a bunch of his cards stashed in your archive.
Yep.
Right. Essentially, it's almost like it's, banished. It's put out of play almost, unless you want to just give them a giant boost. Which I don't know. You could, depending on the deck, it'd have to be a real specific situation, but you could play that to your advantage where you want to cycle through your deck quickly. You want to get that, what is it, Glorious Few, that Sanctum card that I don't know, I mentioned that because of the card I've been interested in lately. It's a card that gives you one, I think, for each creature in excess your opponent has of you. So I just like to sit back and let them build up a giant board line and play that. So in this scenario, I would want that card even more quickly. So assuming I've got, by a couple Biometrics backups, and I have Mars, and I have Sanctum, and I have Glorious Few. The situation is pretty unlikely, I guess. It might be to your advantage to shove those cards into your archive, and not have that much greater of a chance of drawing the cards you're looking for. But that's such an unlikely scenario, I guess, that nobody would play it that way. They might just see the opportunity and go for it, but nobody's playing their deck around like, I have to archive this card so I can have 35 instead of 36 to pull from.
Yeah, I mean, I think the archives in general is one of the least used abilities in this game because of how powerful it is. Like, being able to have the choice of putting cards in the archive really defines a deck's like play style. If you've got a lot of cards that are able to kind of abuse the archive slot, like for good or for bad, say using Zookeeper to put your opponent's cards into your archive and then just leave them there, or Biometrics to be able to pull your cards back quicker. I think that it is a good change that the Biometrics backup was able to just say flat out, this goes into your archive, because it gives a little bit of wiggle room in play with maybe you don't want to put a Biometrics backup on a big key monster of yours because you have a couple creatures, that Zookeepers put in there have gotten into your archives from some other card. And I think the wording on it gives a much better emphasis on play than the choice that May gives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does drive a certain way of playing with the card, which I think is interesting. I'm kind of fascinated by the idea that this may be the very first case that we're aware of where a card as we know it will cease to exist in the way we have known it in Keyforge. I mean, we don't know if future pressings of Keyforge will omit or replace or alter any other card yet. This is the one we know of where, I have to assume that future printings will have the proper text as it's meant to be played on it. Is this the very first time that we know a card is changing forever in the game of Keyforge?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the first time we've been made aware of it. There's other things you can assume, which might make a fun article topic or something, just, purely speculation. But I can think of a couple cards that are going to be, I don't know what'll happen, but they're going to be altered in some way, whether it be their rarity, their current lack thereof. I think there will be some common cards that I think make it onto rare, like bait and switch. I think I could be wrong. They could love the way it disrupts the game, but I would guess it is so freaking common and such a disruptive card that I would bet in future Shadows reproductions, whatever future sets that have the card itself, it'll be a rare or something like that. I would guess maybe library access, time traveler, stuff like that. Just those really common kind of abused cards in an attempt to kind of disrupt the meta. Maybe not though. It would really depend on the other cards that are introduced in the set. If there's equally as valuable cards, because I guess you can't just nerf the popularity of cards. And I might not be answering your question at all, because I'm talking about how frequently they appear or something like that. You're talking about just being drastically changed, like the card itself.
There are certain cards. No. I totally get where you're coming at it from because they're all related topics, right? Like this is one of those things that we have to sort of keep considering is how will the cards as we know them change and how is that going to affect deck makeup? How will the algorithm get tweaked and how it puts these cards together? I think I'm just mostly psyched on the Biometrics backup one because it really does feel like a sort of a little bit of a turning point in the game of Keyforge. We finally have a moment where we know things are changing forever. And it's not this abstract rules thing. It is this very definitive, measurable thing where if you buy a starter set that's printed, in August of this year and it comes with a Biomatrix backup card, you will be able to tell, oh, yeah, this is from the first printing because it has the May text on it, whereas this one must be from a later printing. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting. It'll be interesting if there's other cards that meet that same fate. And it would be probably because they're for completely different reasons, because they're too overpowered or underpowered or something like that. Because as it stands, I can't think of a lot of cards that are just, they're like rule breaking, not game breaking, but rule breaking, kind of like this one, and just requiring interaction.
Well, they fixed the other
during
one.
The
Restringus and Pit Lord, and then Restringus and Call of the Week.
Yeah, that's different though. Those cards are going to keep the same text, I imagine. That was more of a clarifying a rule thing that can't versus can or may or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely much more clarification and giving a precedence to cannot always goes above can.
It's, I think, cannot versus must. And this is one of the things about the rules update that I'm also kind of fascinated by is that's a very fiddly thing to have to clarify in the rules and is not obvious unless you're being very clear and reading all of the rules text as it currently exists. And I think that's going to be one that people are going to be quoting for a long time. Like that's going to be playground knowledge when people are playing Keyforge with like unfamiliar opponents and stuff like that. Cannot versus must just seems like I understand why they had to clarify it because that lockout combo was kind of like it's kind of a bullshit combo. I'm just going to say it, but also it's not a thing that comes intuitively and is not a thing that's super obvious unless you're really digging into the rules. And I wouldn't say it bothers me, but it is one of those things that almost flies in the face of how simple Keyforge seems on the surface.
Well, and it also opens up design space for later sets. Now that they've definitely cemented that cannot is always above must, it allows them to write more cards with both those keywords, being that they have a defined order now. So them changing it is definitely more advantageous.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other ones on this list. Amber on cards that may be spent on keys like Safe Place, which is a Shadows artifact that lets you. I don't have the card pulled up right here, but it lets you once per turn you can use the action and pull one of your amber from your pool over to the card, and it just exactly like the name says, it's a safe place that it can't be stolen from, and it says you may spend amber on this card when forging a key. Which is kind of a weird, not for the reasons they've clarified, but it's a weird card text to begin with because it makes it sound like you can take amber from your pool and put it onto that card when you spend it, and I think they could have worded it better, but it's not confusing enough that anyone's like argued about it. But now it says if you have amber on somewhere like Safe Place, it must be spent if the total combined amber is enough to forge a key. So if you have 5 in your pool and you have 1 on Safe Place, you have to use it to forge a key. And I saw somebody asking in the Facebook group, they even tagged Brad, and I don't think he responded. But if it's on Safe Place, is it? And this raises another question. If it's on Safe Place, do you have to like declare check to your opponent? And I asked, I didn't care about the answer to that, but I asked my own question on there, and I never got a response, which I think has been asked a couple times and it's never been clarified. I have a good idea what the answer is, but my question to him is, is check a rule or is it a courtesy? Because if it's a rule, the penalty for not declaring check surely can't be you don't get to forge a key, because that would be to someone's benefit, for a Caliphi Dragon, for example. But how, I don't know. It's just it's a weird thing, and it's one of the things that I kind of gripe about when it comes to Keyforge, because there hasn't been anything super definitive about it. I would say it's just a courtesy, even though they put it in the rule book for some reason. It's just hey, let me help you out. Let me let you know this. But I don't know. I'm kind of the mindset that you and your opponent should both be doing your kind of due diligence, keeping track of the board, and you should know what's going on. And it's almost to your advantage to. I mean, well, it's obviously your advantage, but there are times when like I can tell my opponent doesn't realize I have 6 amber on it, and it's not because I have some weird amber tokens that are stacked in a strange way that he can't count them. It's just he's not paying attention, and that's drastically going to affect the way he plays his turn or not. I would hope that it would just it would be a kind of an adult way to play the game, I guess, an adult rule, and it's just like, oh, pay attention, do your homework. If you miss it, you miss it. But it's I'm curious if it's actually a rule or if it's just kind of a courtesy thing.
No, it definitely it has to be a rule in that regard. Like, if you have the ability to make a key next turn through any means other than hidden information in your hand, say like a key charge or something crazy like that. Like, if you have safe space or the Logos one that does the same thing, pocket dimension, and you have 3 on there and 3 on your Archon card, call check. You are publicly showing that you can make a key next turn.
I mean, I'm publicly showing that I can make a key by having amber down on the board, by having 6 amber down there.
So call check.
It's not a secret that. Well, I mean, I've been calling check. I've been screaming check, the entire turn because I've got 3 on safe places that he can see and 3 on my pool.
But at the end of the turn, you are required to still call check. Now, is there?
Am I required? That's my whole question. And like you're given kind of a real definitive response to it, and there's not one. Like you're saying, I must call check. Like it suggests in the rules that you call check, but I don't know what's the penalty for not calling check? Because you can't stop me from forging a key. What you can do is disqualify me, and that seems like
that'd be way too.
That seems like an extreme reaction in chess. Check is not actually a thing that you are required to declare, and is usually not done in formal games. Like, the assumption is that if you're playing at a formal or high level game, then it's your opponent's responsibility to notice that he's in check or that you've got him in check. But I mean, I don't know how much we can map over from chess because we're only borrowing the terminology. Like, it's not comparable. Check is basically end state game in chess.
Sure.
Like, either you have to do something or the game is literally over. Whereas, you can be in check 3 times or more, depending on if people, claw back amber from you or play miasma and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily 100% mappable. But I'm very curious to know the answer to that myself, Nick, because I have yet to be in a situation where it has affected a game. Like, I watch my opponent's amber like a hawk, especially once I got messed up by Pocket Universe, the Logos card, where you do the same thing as with Safe Space, right? Like, you can just use it to stock up on amber and then use it to forge keys when it's key forging time. And I lost a game badly because I wasn't paying attention to what my opponent was doing with that. So, but yeah, there has to be some clarification on that. My personal feeling is if they came out and said it's just a courtesy and you don't have to do it, it wouldn't bother me. It means that I have to be a good player and pay attention to what my opponent is doing. I will be interested to see if it's anything other than that.
And I'm not disagreeing with you that you should be taking care of your own board state and keeping an eye on things. But I mean, quite literally in the rulebook, page 5, step 5, draw cards. When a player's turn ends, if that player has enough amber in their pool to afford a key, and I would consider their pool to be also the safe space and pocket dimension stuff, the player announces check, so that their opponent knows the forging of the key at the start of the next player's turn is imminent. It says it directly in there. There is no punishment for it. I don't.
I mean, it does. I was expecting you to really shut me down and say that it says the player must declare check, and it was really like a way more soft. At this point, the player would declare check. Like it to me sounds like it's very much a courtesy the way that's written.
The word check only appears 3 times in the document, and specifically the new document, and twice in the old one. Because there's another check call that got added to the FAQ. But yeah, that's That is quite literally all it says, is that when a player's turn ends, the player announces check. But it says clearly in there, if the player has enough amber, they announce check. It's also in one of those little sub areas. So, I mean, I think this is something that's going to be debated back and forth until FFG gives us an official ruling on it or gives us some sort of penalty. And I really hope there's no penalty for it, because that allows you to mitigate, like, do I not call check so I can't forge a key this turn? Maybe I want to play this dragon that's in my hand. I'm not going to call check this turn, just so like, oh wait, I didn't call check. I guess I can't forge a key, guys. Like that also seems
Right.
awful.
Well, that's kind of the thing. Like whether they want you to require you to call check or not, it's one of those things that has no real, good enforceable punishment or penalty for not doing it. You can't stop them from forging a key. You can't disqualify them. You can't end the game.
Well, I mean, you could totally disqualify them. They didn't follow a rule. I think that's insanely harsh, and if any TO does that, they are out of their gourd. But they didn't follow a rule. You give them a warning. They didn't follow a rule again. After you gave them a warning, like, I think they're out of their gourd if they even try that. But they're within their rights? Question mark. I don't know. Even saying it, I don't like it. But
I think people would lose their minds if they did it. People would fight super hard about it. But you can't, there's no good punishable, punishment, whatever you'd call it. People suggest, give them a chain if they don't do that. It's like, no, that's, I don't know. I would guess they'll come out and clarify that it's, as they might update the rulebook to say, like, as courtesy, the player would inform the other, the opponent.
I'd be fine with an as courtesy thing. But like I said, as it says in right now, the rules do say you have to announce check without being
No, they
saying
don't.
harsh
They
to.
don't say you have to announce check. Like, read it as it is. I don't mean to argue so much. But
No, I'm happy to argue. That's what I'm here for.
Right. I mean, I don't have it in front of me like you do, but the way you've read it over and over again, it's really just suggesting, like, I'm picturing it in the context of, like, a, welcome to Keyforge, like a first time, hand holding kind of thing. At this point, it's right up there with, you draw a card. Like, it's just real basic stuff. And it's saying, then the player, would announce check. It's just like that if we want to really pick that wording apart, it's very clear that it's kind of a, a suggested, but not a, it doesn't sound like a requirement to me, honestly.
If I could interject here for a second, what I think is really interesting is that, Nick, what you're saying is really opening up an area that I've never considered before, which is what is the penalty for not doing things that are so intrinsic and basic to gameplay that we take them for granted that people will do them? Things like drawing cards, things like shuffling your deck. I mean, obviously there are tons of ways that people could cheat in and around those things, but because there hasn't been any major organized play outside of at a regional store level yet, and like there's no Worlds of Keyforge yet, although there's been some news in and around that this past week, it sort of makes me wonder, will there be a set standard for minor infractions, major infractions? You brought up the idea of perhaps you get chains for certain infractions. Maybe you forfeit the match if you're shown to be doing things in a way that could be construed as a pattern of cheating or trying to cheat the game. Much like Steven said with his, maybe I will forego forging a key so that I can get the Kelpie Dragon out on my next turn. That's all stuff that we don't know about yet.
Oh, if someone does that to me, I'll call a judge immediately. Like that, I would hopefully want them to have a warning and it to be reset the first time. But if he's already been, like, if I say he, I apologize. If the person has already been put into that position and already been given a warning, they're obviously cheating. And I hate to say that cheating is a thing that's going to happen in any game, but it's something that's going to happen in every game. It doesn't matter. Anything that has competitive, people will go and they will try and win in any possible way, unfortunately. And it will cause these problems that we're talking about. Not now, definitely, but later on. These questions are going to come up at some point, and they'll need to be talked about with FFG, for good or for bad. And I'm hoping that, I'm kind of a player who will give a lot more trust to my opponent, and take things as benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, if I'm at a world's stage, I want the game to be as fair and clean as possible. And if I notice someone cheating, like I will be nice about it, but I will call them out on it. And it's after that, it's up to a TO to take it out of my hands. It's on them, not me.
Yeah, and thankfully with Keyforge, there's not a lot of moving parts in the game. I can, you gave some examples, and I think those are like the majority of the examples. There's some card interactions you could, conveniently ignore, I guess. But, drawing, forging your key, things like that. Like you've got like what, 3, 4, 5 at most of these kinds of, not, interpret it for what I'm actually saying, but of these kind of like optional things that happen. They're not optional at all, but they're things that you could easily, quote unquote, forget and move past that could benefit you in some way. You want less cards in your hand because you're about to, interact with your own hand or something like that. But my point is, as things develop, especially, as things get more serious this year, the card pool is so small that it'll, people will be able to very quickly recognize the trends, recognize the ways that people are trying to cheat and trying to purposely misinterpret rules or cards. And, we'll have 2 or 3 of them that we know to look out for. We'll know that like right now, I bet you don't pay attention to how many cards your opponent has in their hand. But if if in the next couple of months, a weird kind of cheating meta develops where it's to their benefit to, accidentally underdraw to 5 cards or something, that's a specific example, but it's one that I think could be a thing. It will start being a thing where the opponent becomes more, or you as the player starts being way more aware of how many cards your opponent has in their hand. It'll be right up there with you counting their amber, before the beginning of your turn or at the end of their turn or whatever. You'll also watch them draw up their cards and make sure they have the appropriate amount. Because right now we do make sure you're hyper aware of it when you have a God, what's the discard that makes that, is it succubus that makes them draw
Yeah,
one less?
succubus
Or
makes them
mind
draw one
bard.
less. Yep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
mind bard
okay,
is
when
what
you have
makes them
one of those,
discard randomly, which would also fit into this.
okay, yeah, when you have one of those out, you're hyper aware of what they've got. But just in general, I think we'll really quickly find the few ways that people are cheating. I think it'll get more and more complicated as the game develops and the card pool, grows to 1,000, 1,200, 2,000, whatever it ends up being. But right now with, whatever it is, 300, 400 cards, something like that, we'll quickly figure out the ways people will try to cheat. And, it'll just be like a cheating meta and like a cheat proof meta where everyone will just realize, here's what I have to do to protect myself during the game to make sure my opponent's not cheating.
Yeah, the one thing that I think is really ripe for cheating, and I do not for a second believe that Keyforge will have an excessive cheating problem any more than any other competitive game that exists. Like, I think the point that one of you made, I don't remember who just now, is well taken. That just cheating is a fact of life in competitive environments, and it happens in every human endeavor where cheating is a possibility, be it sports, be it games. It is just a literal fact of the human condition. So this is not a criticism of Keyforge or the construction of Keyforge when we talk about cheating in that way. But the one area that I think that is especially ripe for it is chains. People will forget, quote unquote, their chains. And the reason I know this is because I myself, through no effort to cheat, have forgotten about my chains in play. And I had to be reminded, and I was woefully embarrassed. The opposing player was very cool about it and took me at my word that this wasn't me trying to screw with them or get around having played Gateway to Dis or something like that had accumulated me some chains. But yeah, it was embarrassing for me. But it is one area where I don't know that people are intentionally paying close attention to their opponent's chains as of yet. And I have seen some chain heavy decks, multiple gateways to dis, multiple save the pack. That's the untamed one that destroys every damaged creature, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, or Coward's End, undamaged creatures. It's just going to be something that we're all going to have to start looking for.
And I'm right there with you. I miss my chains more often than not, and I think it's partially due. Um, Maybe not because I miss them and I do something differently. I don't use a chain tracker. I think they're kind of silly. I take a dice with the amount of chains I have and I stick it on top of my deck. So I like literally can't draw without noticing it and reminding myself. And that usually fixes it. But I'm also like really, really unaware of how many chains my opponent has when they have. They can announce them. They can set their chain tracker up, put a coin on top of their deck, whatever they do. Um, and it's one of those things that like it hasn't existed in a game that I'm aware of, that I've participated in. So it's just not something that's ever really on my radar. And it doesn't come up enough to like yet to really, I guess again, to be on my radar. Amber, you're hyper aware of the amber because it's the most integral part of the game. Like you're always aware of yours and theirs. But with change, it appears, maybe once every couple games. Sure, there's times where it occurs frequently, but for the most part, I think people play around like giving themselves chains. And it's not a super common thing to see. So it's not familiar enough. I mean, for me at least. But I think maybe as we continue to like have to deal with it, it'll be more on our radar, and kind of like you said, especially if it starts being purposely abused. I think for the most part, I haven't really played anyone that's sketched me out. I've played one person that I've talked about on here that like misplayed a lot of the card interactions and like misread a lot of the mechanics to the point where I wondered if it was on purpose. And I think their dad, who was there that same night, was in the same boat, which also kind of works in their favor because it's possible they just played together and they both just learned it wrong. But they had said they'd played it since the very beginning. So I don't know, but that doesn't matter. But aside from that, I haven't had anyone that's like really skeeved me out. I've had people say like, "Oh shit, you had succubus out and for the last 2 turns I've drawn." And I've drawn up to 6 cards, and I'll say, "Oh, dude, doesn't matter. Thanks for saying that." Um, I haven't had anyone that I've noticed, like, all right, draw up to 6, and then I've never walked away from that with the vibe that like, oh man, they knew what they were doing. Like they wanted those 6 cards. They were doing that on purpose. And that's because the majority of what I've played personally hasn't been super competitive. I think we've done like 3 or 4 real tournaments, and all the rest has been like real casual play, and everyone's kind of learning. So you're not at your best game. Probably the majority of people, you're not foaming at the mouth and teeth gnashing, ready to pounce on people who misplay. So I don't think you're kind of in a teaching mode more than anything. Maybe I think the majority of people are, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of. I keep using the phrase cheating meta, and I'm already sick of hearing myself say it. But for lack of a better phrase, it'll be interesting to see what kind of cheating meta like arises from this and how people, play and try to purposely misinterpret cards and rules and
Yeah,
mechanics
I
and
don't
effects
I
and
don't
stuff
think at
like
least
that.
right now people are not misinterpreting cards badly on purpose. I think it's just they're misinterpreting, and goes back to what we were saying the last week or a couple weeks ago about the words of the cards being so important in any card game. They are seeing the word and they have their own meaning for the word and what it means to them, and they're putting that interpretation on it. So it'll take some time, and Fantasy Flight will clarify a lot more of these wording issues, and they'll get keywords down a lot better. So I think as the game starts moving into the time of triumph, you're going to see a lot less of that happening.
I mean, I think you're mostly right. I will say, and I've seen it in the Facebook group a lot. People will argue the definition of cards and mechanics and stuff like that, oftentimes in
Oh
their favor.
yeah,
I think it's happening less so now that there's kind of a consensus about how there's how rules work, and you can't really pull the veil over anyone's eyes anymore because most people are like I said, the card pool is so small. There's only however many mechanics to pick from. There's not a lot to learn once you've kind of dug your hands in. But at the beginning, I remember seeing a lot of it, and it was cards like Biometrics Backup and stuff like that, where the biggest argument was being made on like their own behalf. Like, oh, I was playing this game and they want that ruling, whether it's for their own ego to know they were right or because it'll let them feel justified in the way they won the game, or kind of justify their loss, make up for that. Like, oh, we played that card wrong. See, I knew he was wrong. I think a lot of people are doing that. They'll read a card. I wish I could think of an example because it wasn't a cheating thing. It's a guy I play with a lot. But a card came down and gosh, I cannot remember what it was, but I knew he was wrong about it. And he was like, just the way he responded to it, he was almost upset that he was wrong. And he kind of argued a couple times on it. Just like, no, that doesn't really make sense. And it wasn't an argument like, he wasn't making the argument on behalf of like the card, like, oh, I think the mechanics should work this way. It was, oh man, this really changes my turn. Are you sure it's not how this works? And I think that probably happens more often than you think. But speaking of card effects, modifications, things like that, the first turn rule, which has said a player may play, I don't remember what the exact ruling from the rulebook says, but the idea is that you may play one card from your hand on your first turn. First turn you draw 7, you can play 1. That's the advantage. You get an extra card. The biggest exception to that, not really an exception because it doesn't break that rule, was Wild Wormhole. You can play Wild Wormhole from your hand, which plays the top card of your deck, and that card was also valid. It wasn't even really argued by anyone that it should be any different. I don't think. There might have been a few people griping about it, but they've changed it now. So, for example, the example they use is Phase Shift, which lets you play a non-logos card your first turn. You can play that card down, and that will let you play an additional card out of your hand, which is a pretty significant change. I don't know if there's any other cards that are affected by that.
Off the top of my head, I think it's just Phase Shift,
which isn't a super big deal. The best it does is it clears you out so you can draw a card at the end of your turn, just one.
I'd still get into the deck faster. That's still a big advantage.
But I buy one card, I guess. It's, if you had mulliganed, you would be at 6, and then you'd play out down to 4, so you draw 2 cards. Again, I don't know how big of an advantage that gives you. It's kind of a second mulligan-ish. Not really, but that's something new. Take that for what you will. I don't think it's particularly interesting, but
I think it's interesting how fast they changed their mind on it. Because in version 7, which we're on version 8 right now of the rulebook, version 7 is when they modified the first turn rule, saying specifically that during the first player's first turn of the game, the player cannot play or discard more than one card, like basically, period. It says specifically, card effects cannot modify this rule. And then a couple, 2 months or 2 weeks or so after we got rulebook 7, rulebook 8 comes out, and it's like, oh yeah, no, you can the cards can modify that rule. It's cool. And I'm not sure if it was because they got a little bit of backlash in the community, or if just internally they're like, no, that's kind of dumb. I don't think that it's. I think that again,
it could be in preparation of another set.
Yeah, that's something. I think it gives a lot more design space that you can have a card that would be able to mess with that first turn rule.
Right, because my guess, it'd be interesting to see kind of statistics. And I actually, gosh, I wish I had been logging this. I have my big spreadsheet that I do wins, losses, and all that crap. But I wish I had logged first turn, second turn, because they might be seeing, I don't know how they'd be able to see it, just internally, I guess. They might be seeing first turns at a significant disadvantage, which is the case. That
I disagree with you highly.
You're wrong.
Go first turn.
This debate.
You're absolutely wrong because how many times I see it on Crucible a lot, and Crucible's a bad example because people are doing what they're doing on there. But it helps my case, so I won't rag on it. But there have been so many times where I'll go my first turn. My librarian deck has Wild Wormhole. That's what I mulligan for, just so I can have something. So I'll play Wild Wormhole and I'll think, all right, I got 2 amber my first turn, Wild Wormhole, and then the card that it played gave me another amber. And their first turn, they'll do this, that, and the other, and they'll end it with 6 amber. It's like, oh my god, like this game, the game's not over, but the game, it changed from being this fun back and forth to being this kind of like, more stressful scenario, and it happens frequently. I don't care what anyone says. First player is absolutely, without a doubt, 1,000% at a disadvantage.
I think this is confirmation bias. Technically, it's confirmation bias on both of our parts because I also don't have anything to back up my case like fully solid with numbers. But I think that having that extra mulligan or the free mulligan, basically, it's so beneficial for you. Like you're able to look through your hand and you're able to put something down in play immediately, and you're able to start taking control of the board state like as soon as you possibly can.
Okay, I have a couple of things to address there. It's not confirmation bias because I can totally exclude my personal experience, and you can just look at how it works. You draw an extra card, you play one single card, and then they're free to just go hog wild. I don't think that mulligan is super valuable, especially in the context of Keyforge, because it's one less card still. Whatever, you end up at 6 instead of 5. With Keyforge, you draw up to 6 no matter what. With the few exceptions. Like it's not a game where you draw one card at the end of your turn and you're just, I don't know. I simply don't agree. I think I would love to see what people in the comments have to say, because what's I'd love to see what people have to say in general, and I would love to see, break the card rules of Keyforge, build, in your mind, build your own deck, your best constructed deck. Like, what is the absolute best case scenario for first turn? Like, how big of an advantage can you really get first turn? Like you mentioned, boards, you have that advantage, that first go at board state. Like, you have the advantage at one card on board state. Like, the person that gets the advantage is the second person who has this weak kind of spit up of one artifact, one creature, and they just get to vomit all over the board with who knows, whatever they have in their hand. I don't know. I don't buy it.
I'll put out an argument in both directions here. On the one hand, I would agree with Nick that the advantage is if you get a very strong hand as the second player, you can get out to a very early advantage. I don't mind going first because I think I also take something of Steven's perspective, which is I like the ability to craft my hand a little bit. Like, all right, let's say I've got 7 cards. I can mulligan. I'm at 6 cards. I've got 3 of one house, 2 of another house, and 1 of a single solo house. Well, I can only play 1 card this turn. I'll put out the 1 house, and then I know that going into my next turn, I'm in a position where I'll have some kind of ability to play out a couple more cards in all likelihood. Nick, the comment you made with regards to always drawing back up to 6 kind of obliterates the way I think we're trained to think about card advantage in many ways. So there's a lot of good arguments on both sides of this debate, I think. But I think I would come down a little bit on Nick's side, if only from the perspective of there is no way to get up to a key if you are the first player. Like, there is no card you can play. I think the closest you could come would be to play Fertility Rite, which will give you 4 and amber, your opponent 2. But there are lots of ways where if you are going second, if you had the right hand, you could get up to a key.
Right. I'll say a couple things about that. You play that Fertility, and you've just, you've almost sealed the deal in a lot of cases for your opponent to be, getting 6 amber a turn is very uncommon. Getting 4 amber a turn is not super crazy. And if you've just boosted your opponent up by 2 in that, it seems like a good deal for you to get that 4, but you've given them 2, and I don't know. I don't see it. You made the kind of, you created the scenario where you draw up and you have 3 of one, 2 of one, and then 1 of another house, and you play that first house. That's a scenario that I have all the time, and it's almost your only option. It's not. You can play all sorts of stuff, whatever. Maybe I'm just not a good strategist, whatever, if that's a word. But you play that one card. You have 2 Sanctum, 3 Brobnar, 1 Logos. You get that 1 Logos card out of your hand. You put it down. And then what? And the next turn, you've got the exact same hand. Do you pick logos? Assuming it's not a beneficial, like a some kind of omni card, whatever. It's a waste. It's a complete waste of a turn. Let's pretend it didn't even give you an amber. Like then you've just, I don't know, you've spit something stupid on the board. You're not really going to interact with. Your opponent may or may not touch it. It's just, I don't know. I don't mean to be so aggressive about it, but I to bring it all the way back around, I would bet that phase shift change has something to do with, one, seeing an unbalance between, first and second turn, and also to like kind of pad that or open it up for what another set may throw in there to kind of make it more appealing to go first. Because tell me right now, I mean, I guess you wouldn't see it, but I mean, you'd see your opponent's reaction. Even if you love going first, when you roll that die and they go first or whatever, almost 100% of the time, your opponent shrugs and sighs and says, "Well, I guess I'm going first." Or it's a dice game before the game where with the few exceptions, the goal is to roll the lower number. I mean, that's been my experience, and not even just from me
Yeah,
doing that.
I think that's a meta thing for you because in my meta, like I said, going first is that's the coveted. Like we just flip for it. We don't roll any dice or anything like that because it just has to be randomly chosen anyway. But like going second just seems to be like the worst choice. It limits you on your options that you get to do on your second turn.
I would be fascinated to know if anyone agrees with you on that in the nicest way possible.
That's fine. I'll happily keep taking my first position. Then you can just keep handing me first. I'll be happy.
I gotta say it's a scrappy week on library access, and I am loving it. Because this makes for good podcasting. And it's certainly, I think, going to be an interesting one to see the comments. There's been a lot of great commenters on YouTube over the last little while, people really throwing in their 2 cents, agreeing with us, disagreeing with us, laying out their comments. It's an exciting thing, I think, to have these kinds of disagreements because it really does highlight the variation in the way that the game is played regionally and even at different stores. Like, there are pools of players that stick to one specific store where their local game is at. And there's people who rove between them. And there's people who are going to be heading down to Emerald City Comic Con for the first time to check out, the organized play that's going to be happening down there and encountering players from entirely different metas that they've never met before in some of the first real organized play. Exciting stuff for Keyforge and exciting times for us to really start figuring out what our assumptions are and whether our assumptions are correct and whether they are borne out by other people's experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to clarify, I don't hate Steven. Just some of his opinions.
I don't think you came across that way. Whoa. Scrappy week.
But let's move on to another one that I think is kind of a goofy one, and not a funny one, but a kind of a weird ruling. And I'm curious to see if you guys agree. Armor prevents damage before it is dealt. So in the scenario of a Shadow Self, which absorbs damage from his neighbors on either side, the only damage he takes is after the armor is spent on the creature being targeted. So you have a Sanctum with, 6 power, 2 armor. You attack, that Sanctum creature. Shadow Self only takes 4 damage instead of the I effed those numbers up, but he takes the damage minus the armor of that Sanctum card. Do you agree with that new ruling?
Yeah, that's super weird.
Yeah, I've been playing it that way the entire time specifically because of shadows and how poison works. Like that's exactly what alluded me to the correct ruling on it. But yeah, this confirmed my ruling, and I've been playing it correctly, and I'm happy with this ruling.
I don't disagree with it from a perspective of it making sense, but it's a way that I hadn't thought about damage previously. And it's kind of almost in the same category as that cannot may thing we were talking about earlier, or that cannot must thing we were talking about earlier, which is this is a fiddly thing that, has to be clarified to make sure that the game is being played consistently. but is also one of those things that may not be blatantly obvious from just general play that people are really going to have to keep in mind, especially once we get into competitive areas of play. Like it, I guess it makes sense, but it's also a thing that isn't totally intuitive to make sense. Like you really do have to sit down and think through why the rule is that way, I think, to a certain degree, which I think is interesting.
It reminds me a lot. I'm not disputing that it should be that way. Um, I wouldn't have guessed it, and if I were writing the rules myself, if I had that executive decision in the boardroom, I'd say like, no, it just all the damage, he absorbs the damage. And I guess if you picture it in kind of a goofy way, like a 3-dimensional battle going on, I suppose the shields would block some of that damage, but whatever. But it reminds me a lot of the whole. God, this is going to be a topic idea. I was going to ask if there's any rules you guys disagree with. I guess I'll give mine. We can go back to it if you have examples. But it's the Wild Wormhole Cliffy Dragon. Wild Wormhole plays the top card of your deck. If that card happens to be Cliffy Dragon, Cliffy Dragon states that you must have 7 amber or more to play the card. The rulings state, I think Brad said it, the card goes back to the top of your deck. And I think that's total nonsense. That's called, the card is Wild Wormhole. It's not, conditional, kind of crazy wormhole. And it seems a lot like that. Cards where like the rulings and the mechanics and all that were pretty straightforward and didn't need to be reinterpreted. I mean, I suppose some people out there may have made the argument for the Shadow Self, armor, stuff like that. But I would guess the bulk of them just, like the card says, it absorbs damage from a neighbor. I guess, maybe I'm totally wrong. Because I guess if you read the card text, it absorbs damage and not, absorbs the attack. If that's a phrasing that's ever been used anywhere, that could make more sense. But I don't know. I think most people would have read that as absorb the damage. Just, if you're getting attacked, it goes to Shadow Self instead. Not, after the armor. It seems kind of like a weird kind of, I don't know how to say it exactly, but this kind of just like up and down, like loosey goosey, kind of like, weaving in and out over and under like these rules, mechanics. I don't know. Just kind of conditional things like if this, then this, if that, then that. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but it reminds me of the Cliffy Dragon thing a lot, where just like it didn't seem like it needed to be altered, reinterpreted, anything like that. But I don't know.
Yeah, Cliffy Dragon made 100% of sense. If you like where Cliffy Dragon goes after it comes out, that was kind of weird to me. But the card,
You disagree? You disagree that Wild Wormhole shouldn't be able to play Cliffy Dragon?
yeah, it should not be able to play Cliffy Dragon if you don't have 7 amber, because Cliffy Dragon specifically says that this card can only be played, and Wild Wormhole says you play the next card.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
And especially now that cannot is above anything else,
sure.
it puts it back on top of the deck.
I mean, I mean, as far as the rulings go, cannot, over must, whatever, must may. Neither of them say must may. It just, I don't know. To me, like again, to be kind of silly about it, consider the lore, whatever. It's a Wild Wormhole. It's just shitting cards out onto the field. Like it's not, if this, then you may pass. It's look at the card art. He's crying, like it's supposed to be this big chaotic crazy thing, not this weird conditional thing like that. I don't know. Maybe it makes that it. I don't know. Maybe that's a ruling because they didn't realize the potential for that combo, and because Cliffy Dragon's such a good card, if and when you can get it out, that they had to do something.
Win more card.
Yeah,
it is definitely a win more card. But yeah, no, I'm 100% about that. That was the correct ruling on it. Because, like I said, specifically, Wild Wormhole just lets you play the next card. However, you can't play the next card because of whatever condition the card has, Doesn't matter for Cliffy specifically, but any other card they make in more sets. If there's any restriction on the card, you still have to have the board state to be able to play the card. Because that's all Wild Wormhole does. It just goes, take the card of the deck, and play it as normal. It doesn't specifically say as normal on the card because that's should have been implied. It should say play as normal on the card. which would completely have gotten rid of this debate. But yeah, it makes sense in the rules. It's not 100% worded correctly, but like in my head, how I read the cards, it made sense to put it back on top of the deck or to put it in the discard, which is what I actually did in the beginning. Because I was like, oh, I can't play it, and it doesn't tell me where this goes.
What's the name of the creature who you have to pay 3 to put them out, and when they die, you get 5? Do you know the creature I'm talking about?
I know the card art. I don't know the name.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I just spent like 30 seconds like trying to Google it on my phone so that I could make this point around it. Um, as much as I think the Kelpie Dragon ruling makes sense now that they've clarified the cannot must aspect of it, it does kind of bug me because I feel like it takes away some of the wildness of Wild Wormhole. And I've talked before on this podcast about my love for Wild Wormhole just being a wacky thing happens. Maybe it's advantageous. In a lot of cases, it will be. You get a creature that you didn't get to put out before. An effect happens that may advantage you, or maybe something really bad happens. Maybe you have board advantage and you Wild Wormhole a gateway to Dis. Maybe you Wild Wormhole, a Champion's Challenge or something like that that really affects the state of the board that was advantageous to you previously. There's all kinds of ways in which Wild Wormhole can do both good and bad things. Even just today, I Wild Wormholed out the Shadows creature where it's steal 2, and when you die, your opponent steals 2. Except that my opponent didn't have any amber to steal. So basically, I put out a thing that was then a target for them to get 2 amber for free off of me. That's Wild Wormhole. And so it kind of bums me out to see like one of the wildest applications of Wild Wormhole come to an end. Although, if they are consistent with this ruling, which it looks like they are, I guess I have to accept that. So, I mean, I agree that with the spirit of Nick's argument, while agreeing with the wording of the ruling.
Yeah, I mean, I've done some real bad wormholes myself. Like I've wild wormhole into Keyhammer and just been like, oh, here's your 6 amber. Whoops. And I love it.
That has to be the worst one. That has to be the worst one.
And I honestly love Wild Wormhole that it has that kind of a random effect in a game that is built around so much, for lack of a better term, RNG. A lot of this game, it is delved and lives and thrives in random. And I love that. It's absolutely one of the best things about this game. It's a good selling point to me, other than that just being a spend $10, get a deck, you're good to go. But I think and I think you're 100% right on this, is as long as they're consistent with their rulings and their wordings, it's okay. And I'm okay if I'm wrong with how I interpret cards that eventually come out and they're like, hey, we didn't mean it to do like this. We actually meant it to do this. And that's cool, whatever. I'm okay being wrong as long as the game is consistent. The card you were looking for was a True Baru, by the way, from Dees.
Yeah, that guy's a dick. I hate that guy.
What? You just pay a little bit of amber. He comes out and he's a 7-power taunt.
Well, I don't have a deck with him in it, so he's entirely a dick to me.
That's fair. Okay.
Once I get a deck with him, he'll be like my best pal. We'll be going to the movies, getting ice cream. It'll be awesome.
Man, I want some ice cream now.
Here's an interesting one. If a player is using a deck that has chains applied to it at the start of the game and takes a mulligan, they do not shed a chain from the mulligan, but do draw 1 fewer cards than they had before the mulligan, as per the normal mulligan rules, which is kind of oddly written, I feel like. And I guess it's saying, I honestly, I can't understand it.
So, you can't use a mulligan to break a chain. That's all.
Right. So you have a chain. You draw 6 at the beginning of your turn, and then you mulligan down to. It doesn't specify. Do you mulligan down to 5, or do you mulligan to?
You mulligan down to 5. You lose 1 card from the mulligan from your original draw, which was the 6.
Oh yeah, but yeah, do draw 1 fewer than they had. Okay. A lot of these things. This is just an old man gripe, but it seems like a lot of these rules, like the Restringuntus one. I remember there was a big discussion about it. These like rules clarifications are like almost as complicated as as the situation was before. Not all of them. A lot of them, bring a lot of closure to certain discussions. But like it seems like a lot of these are just like not in the context of something where you're having to like clarify a ruling. It should just be so freaking simple. Just, no fancy language, no running in circles, just here's how the card works. And a lot of times it seems like, in the context of this, like it didn't need to be a whole paragraph explaining how that works.
As somebody who comes from other card games, sometimes there are some weird interactions that need to be explained out in a paragraph, and that's normal for any card game. More so with Fantasy Flight card games, I've noticed, for better for worse. But yeah, just every once in a while there's an interaction that the game developers didn't think about or didn't see coming, and they just need to explain, the actual, like, why it works the way it does sometimes. It's I don't disagree that sometimes the paragraphs kind of run on a bit, but it's good to know their reasoning, so then you can apply it to other scenarios that happen down the road.
So one of the interesting ones, and I'm gonna mess this whole thing up. It says destroyed effects happen immediately before a creature is destroyed and leaves play. Any other constant abilities that reference destroyed creatures happen after destroyed effects, and constant abilities do not trigger if the creature with the constant ability is destroyed. So I think the big card that was discussed during it, and I don't know if it had like a little section at the end with, God, it was with Bad Penny. It was a card that said, when your opponent plays this card, it says, I think it's a dis one.
Yixi Bolter.
What is that?
It was the purge card
Yeah,
from
yep,
Mars.
yep. When a card is destroyed, it's instead purged. Um, I think most people would have read that initially as, like your Bad Penny, it gets destroyed. Instead of being destroyed, it's purged. Um, I don't know. I still just, now it says your Bad Penny goes to your hand regardless, because that destroyed effect triggers before anything else happens, which I'll accept it. I won't be, and I'm not just grouchy. I'm not just complaining about all these rules.
I actually agree with you on this one.
Yeah,
I
some
think
of
it's
these
bad
are
rule.
just genuinely strange.
I think that Bad Penny should be purged, but
Right.
Let me roll a card at you here, and without looking at the rule book, you tell me how you think this should be played, or how it has been played, because I'm sure you've come across it. You probably have decks within it. Crump is a 6-power creature. He has the statement on his card: after an enemy creature is destroyed fighting Crump, its controller loses 1. If you use Crump to fight another 6-power creature, assuming there's no armor in play, he destroys the creature. Does his effect happen before he is destroyed?
his effect does not happen because it is a permanency effect, because there's no actual, like, titles or tags to it. There's no, like, fight or anything like that. The effect will not fire because the creature is removed from play. He's dead before the effect would actually go off at the end.
Okay, so this is a contrast to something like Grenade Snib, which is destroyed, your opponent loses 2. The bold destroyed effect takes place before Snib goes to the discard pile, which is why there is a difference between Crump and Grenade Snib in terms of what happens in those scenarios. Is that correct?
Correct.
Good to know.
I agree with the ruling. I understand why. I think it's wrong. I get why it's the way it is, but especially it's not, the destroyed effects they've been clarified, that those don't trigger, you're not destroyed, but the fight effects don't trigger, which it's just that seems wacky too. That affects, I don't know, I don't agree with most of that those effects don't trigger.
So the reason why Crump doesn't have a bold text fight next to his ability is because Crump's ability will work on both your turn, when bold fight effects would happen, and the opponent's turn, when bold fight effects do not trigger.
Ah, okay.
Fight only happens on your turn. That's the reason why Crump doesn't have anything. It just is playing basic. After an enemy creature is destroyed fighting Crump, its controller loses 1. Crump still has to be on the field, but because it's a not bolded term, it affects on both your turn and your opponent's turn.
Yeah, I think that's goofy.
It is weird, but once you realize that that's how the game is designed, you can see, like, why the other cards have some things, like not Eater Dead. What's the other discard I'm thinking of? I'm looking for right now through the
It's
list.
one that like purges cards from your opponent's discard.
No, it's the one that grabs them. Overload Grecking. That's what it is. I got to it before I actually got down to it. After an enemy creature is destroyed fighting Grecking, put that creature into play under your control. So that works on both players' turns. However, the effect doesn't fire if Grecking is not on the field at the end of the fight. Does that make more sense when I explain it in that direction?
It does, but this comes back to the thing I was talking about earlier, and I've mentioned several times over the course of this episode, is that maybe it was inevitable for us to get to this place where all these very fiddly rules have to be very clear. And I guess now that we're approaching the time of triumph when organized play is going to be a thing, and there will be like a world masters of Keyforge or what have you, we have to have all these things be as clear as humanly possible and any ambiguity be stamped out. It does feel a little bit to me like a game which I feel like it was very simple initially is starting to have a lot of very fiddly rules that you have to keep in mind, and that there's probably going to be arguments about at the table. So I'm hoping that whoever ends up judging for your local events is brushing up on this stuff.
That does it count if it's sometimes me? Because it's
I
sometimes me.
especially hope that you're brushing up on this, Steven. Hit the books, buddy.
To be fair, my local game store, it's mostly Adam, who's also our Magic and all the other Fantasy Flight. He does all the judging for stuff. I step in once when we had a tournament that was scheduled and he got stuck out of town due to some unforeseen circumstances. So like, I stepped in and helped TO'd. But like during open play nights, if I'm there, I'm usually the one that gets asked questions because there just isn't a judge there. So it's me for better or for worse.
Hey, Nick, how closely have you studied the rules? Like, is it a thing where when you first started working on setting up the keyforge.com and started being an active player in the community and, talking to your local game store about the game and, participating in local tournaments, did you ever spend like a good serious amount of time reading like the rules proper, or did you sort of approach it in the same way that I did, where I'm a lazy guy, so I just played a bunch of games on the Crucible and then a bunch of games live and kind of learned the rules that way, which, has the advantage of, one, you're having fun by playing a game while you're learning, but has the disadvantage of it's very easy to misinterpret rules because you're not paying attention closely to why the game is designed in a certain way. Did either of those happen, or was it a combination?
So as somebody that didn't come from Magic, um, I didn't feel the need to overanalyze the card rules. Keyforge is super simple. It's becoming less so now with the kind of the things we're talking about this episode. But like when it right when it came out, it was very simple. It was very straightforward. The cards reacted as they said they did on the card, and for the vast majority of situations, no more than that. So it was real. A lot of people have come from Magic and either interpret things how they would be interpreted in Magic, or assume that much like Magic, there's some much deeper meaning to each card's effects and mechanics, and there's actually way more going on than just what's on there and all these conditional interactions and things like that. And as somebody that didn't come from that, I wasn't, I don't have that background, so I wasn't worried about those things. For the most part, I read the cards as they were. I don't think I read the rule book. I think I pulled it up when I first bought. I bought 2 decks. I brought them to the office and I played with somebody. I think we pulled up the rule book just to see, how turns went, stuff like that. And I know we screwed up a lot initially. And how I really learned was just reading on Facebook, reading the discussions that went down in the arguments and stuff like that, because they saved me the trouble, and they quickly brought up the scenarios that everyone else was encountering. Like I keep saying, with that small card pool and stuff like that, small number of mechanics, there's really not a whole lot of different moving parts, different things that can go wrong. It's really a small group of them, and if you just kind of not necessarily now, because there's kind of a consensus among everything and people have learned, but right at the beginning, the when the Facebook group first popped up, same with the subreddit. There was only a couple rules and things like that were brought up over and over again that like really needed to be brought to people's attention. Oh, this is how this actually works. These are how these interactions are handled. And now I still reference it pretty frequently, and I wish it were more filled out. But Keyforge Compendium, you can search for a card, and then you click the FAQ section of that card. Or not FAQ, at the bottom, questions and answers. And then you can see, for the most part, the idea is supposed to be any dispute with a card can be resolved there, because they list all the, all the clarified rulings, stuff like that. I think they even include stuff where Brad in an email or whatever is just like, nope, this is how this works. Like right now, I've got the Biometrics backup one pulled up. And the only question and answer on it is, how does the errata on January 17th change how this card works? And it just clarifies that. There have been a bunch of times where I've gone to it and it hasn't come through. There will be, times where like I'm confused on this ruling, but I guarantee it's a confusing enough card that there's going to be a clarification on the site, and there hasn't been. And that's happened more often than I would like. And not that I'm complaining, because it's a free service, but I wish they would, find a way, maybe, change the background color of it, make the background color of it red, something like that, and make just like a community consensus answer, which I see how that gets very messy, and but even just, for the next couple months, while there's still rules that need to be clarified by FFG, but FFG's kind of tight-lipped about it. Interactions with cards that are like being brought up every day on Facebook and are occurring, dozens, hundreds of times a day, whatever. There should be like a community consensus of just like, based on these other rules, here's what we're pretty sure is the case, and have it, in giant red text. Just because in the context of a disagreement at a casual game, that would be infinitely better than just, whoever can get the loudest, or whoever's willing to, be angrier about the way they think the card should interact. But for the most part, I relied on that kind of stuff, and just really the Facebook group and stuff like that. And I did want to make a comment. We were talking about how that the destroyed effects work. Biometrics backup now, in the face of that discard that purges the card, as far as that ruling with the destroyed has worked, that card doesn't actually get purged. It goes into your archive, which I don't agree with.
Sorry, the Biometrics backup goes into your archive?
No. The card that it's on. Yeah,
Okay.
It doesn't get purged because it's destroyed. You may put this creature into its owner's archives.
Yep.
So instead of getting purged as it should, it ends up in the archive, which is it. I guess that there's not a lot of scenarios where cards have destroyed effects like that, but I don't know. I don't know if they'll keep it confusing, or if they'll Richard Garfield in an interview said that there were a bunch of mechanics that got scrapped or delayed in favor of keeping it simple initially. So I wonder if they change, some wording like that, maybe not destroyed, but, introduce some additional things, for I can't think of anything on the spot, but maybe a killed, something like that, that just kind of clarifies, here's what happens when this happens, or, like removed. I don't know. They could have something that like separates those when it's killed, when it's, I don't know.
Well, they already do with like Oublet, because Oublet just goes, this card is immediately purged. It's not attacked, it's not destroyed, it's just purged.
Sure.
So they already have stuff in the game that's around the same idea of that. But
I'll tell you, there is one great example of a dynamic or a rule or a thing in Keyforge which is totally underdeveloped because it only exists on, I think, maybe one card. Splash.
Yep. There's a few cards that have Splash, but yeah, it's definitely...
Okay, I've only seen one, or I've only, recognized one when I've seen it. And it's like, it feels to me like a thing that snuck its way out of beta.
I mean, I still think that this is a beta. And that's... I think that we are... the Call of the Archon set it's kind of open beta test. That's just the way it kind of feels to me, for better or for worse. And I've got, again, nothing signifying that this is or isn't. It's just how it feels the cards are. That they kind of just threw things at the wall and see what stuck. So I think that...
I sell 500,000 of your open beta.
I mean, that's real good. But at the same time, I think that's part of where a little bit of this confusion is coming from, where there's still, like, most of the cards are pretty well set. They're great. They do what they need to. It's a good time. Some of them, they're like, we'll leave this effect on there. We'll see how it goes. And again, it's not better. It's not worse. It's just how it feels of a game. But and I can be completely off base on this one. This could be absolutely the intended perfection that FFG envisioned at the beginning. But there's just so many of these like little nuancy things that it still feels a little beta to me. Then again, that being said, I always go back to Netrunner because that's where my basis of card games is Netrunner was the first card game that I really threw a bunch into. Oh, or don't look at the Netrunner FAQ. Oh, you think there are little like 2 or 3 pages of FAQ is bad on here? The Netrunner FAQ is a monster. Like almost every set had a different FAQ related to it. So I'm hoping that I don't mind cards being clarified. I'm hoping that we never get to the point where it was just FAQ on FAQ on this FAQ contradicts this FAQ from earlier this year. I don't ever want that. But I'm okay if they clarify some things up and they're like, this is the way we intended it. We need to clarify our words, but this is how it needs to be. And I'm like, okay, that's fine.
I would guess, and this goes along with people worrying about how they've like screwed up other games in the past, and underproduced them or not paid enough attention to them, or screwed up their online counterparts and stuff like that. People are concerned about that because of FFG's track history that I'm only slightly familiar with, but it ties into the rule thing you're talking about. I would guess it would be the same as, say, I don't know, say this is a really dumb example. Think of it as like you have a child and you put that baby in a commercial, and for some reason it blows up and it's the number one Gerber baby, and people are throwing $1 million contracts at your face. Like, I think at the point that your baby and their baby, in this case Keyforge, just like skyrockets in popularity. It's not this kind of casually popular game like I don't know. Someone will get mad at me for saying this, but I think it's accurate. Like Netrunner or Destiny or whatever. These games that they have a decent following, but they're not these world famous followings. They're not getting talked about like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon. The second it skyrockets up to that, you go and you get lawyers and advisors and this and that. And like I think they, whether they plan for it or not, they're seeing all this crazy success, and they have no choice but to like, oh shit, like we were gonna do this in a really lazy way. We were going to have 3 people working on this and 1 PR person, this and that. And now that it's so popular, it's rapidly gaining popularity. I would guess they're smart enough to know, we need to really treat this like a delicate, like a newborn baby or like a ticking bomb or something like that. That's just my guess. I don't think they'll make the same mistakes that they've made with other projects in the past, simply because they can see the popularity. They can see the fragile glass baby in their hands that they can't afford to break. I would guess that. I could be wrong. They could screw it up, or they also maybe weren't as bad with their past projects that people make it sound like. But
I don't think that they intend on it being lazily in any way, shape, or form. But I definitely think that the Keyforge kind of did blow up a little bit faster than they expected. That it doesn't seem like they've been lazy about anything. Like, this is pretty standard FFG trickling out information. Like, we got the news thing from when they talked about the time of Triumph happening. We didn't really learn anything new from that. It was just a big kind of tease, and they put a little bit into exactly what all of their other tournament structures have been like. They just confirmed that they're using the tournament structure, that chain's going to be a thing, but we knew that. Like, this is kind of standard for FFG, at least news wise. So I don't think that they're being lazy in any way. They're strategically on schedule for their newses, which is very light and very very teasery.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining about the rate at which they release news or anything like that. I think there could be arguments made about like certain rulings needed to be addressed sooner rather than later. Things that were confusing that people kept asking about, and even tagging them in and stuff. But I just mean, and I'm not a good person to like bring this up even because I can't name a specific example. But I've heard enough about FFG's track history to know that they've done damage to some of their big titles that didn't need to go the way that they did, whether it be they died or they had licenses revoked or this or that. They didn't keep up demand for cards, and I mean we're seeing that with Keyforge, but I give them a total pass for that because I assume it's super freaking difficult to anticipate how much a brand new game like that's going to sell. If it keeps up, if by the middle of, and this is being really generous, I think, if by the middle of 2019, if I still can't go to my store and buy Keyforge, if it's out the day, if they're out of stock the day it comes in, then I'll start pointing the finger back at them again. But with the exception of the card supply stuff, I know that's been a thing in the past for games that were years old that they didn't produce enough, you couldn't buy it. And I'm assuming with the way Keyforge is panning out, especially being backed by Richard Garfield and stuff like that, I think they have enough fire under their asses to not let anything go wrong like may have happened in the past.
I agree with you on that. Especially looking at now, like they've got the production lines going, they're shipping pretty well full force. Like my store does not have to have we were never out of cards, and we've only had to do that weird limit on decks for a week.
Okay, we just got a limit on ours.
Really?
Yeah, we like just last week they put a 2 per person limit, and they got us a shipment in on Monday of maybe it was Tuesday or something. They got a shipment in very early, and they had to put boxes aside for this upcoming Monday, like a week later, so they could do sealed.
I had that.
Yeah, it was so uncertain whether they'd get it or not. And my store's been good about it. Like I guess I could be wrong, but from what I understand, the reason their short stores don't have cards is almost exclusively the fault of the card shop. I think there's some times where the rep from whatever the company's called that starts with an A, that rep,
Asmodeus?
maybe,
close to that.
maybe the one that handles the actual distribution of it. I think they do different regional things depending on the area. But what happens is you have to be placing like one order ahead of time. Like you have to place an order, day 1, and then place another order day 7, and then you get your day 1 order on day 14, and then you need to place an order that day, even though you have another one, because if not, you'll have a gap. That may not be exactly how it works, but that general idea is how I think it's working, is that they're waiting until they get their product and they're placing another order. And by that time, they're like 2 or 3 weeks behind. And they're just I don't know if it's because the card shops don't have enough money to fund it or what, but my shop's been really good about that. They've got a consistent, weekly drop in because they're ordering like two order week intervals ahead of time. That's my understanding of how that works.
Asmodeus is a deity in Pathfinder. The company we're thinking about is Asmodee. I had to look it up because I'm like, wait, no, Asmodeus does not sound right. Yeah, I won't pretend to know anything on the card side, like, or on the shop like distribution side on that. I just know that that's the company that they order from. But like other than like I said, that 1 week where they got like two boxes, I think it was like 20 or 30 decks. That was the only time they ever put a limit on it. And after that, like I said, it's been great. We've been able to keep a hold on things at my current store. We just had a sealed that they set a couple decks aside, or I think they set aside 2 or 3 display boxes, and that was all we needed for that. So like, I haven't had any problems getting it locally except for that one single thing. So I don't think they are screwing the pooch on distribution. I think that they realized after the first couple weeks of, oh, this game is great, everyone's loving it, let's put full production, let's go. And I think that they've fixed any problem that they ever would have had for it. I think that they finally finally figured out what they're doing with it and going forward and being like, all right, this is great. Let's keep going.
I think we might be running into a case where our experiences are vastly different because of where we live. Steven out on the East Coast, and Nick in Central, and me over on the West Coast of Canada. So basically, the ends of the earth, as far as a lot of distributors of things are concerned, because there's started to become a shortage in Vancouver over the last little while. Some stores have not been able to restock. Some stores have been doing the limited, or we can't sell you what we have in stock because we need it for our upcoming sealed events. And every time I've asked, it's always been, yeah, we're trying to get more, and no commitment from them there. So it's quite possible that they all fell afoul of the thing Nick was talking about there. I cannot pretend to understand how the ordering works, and I have no insight into it. But it is the part of me that wonders, are some areas really prioritized because of their relationship with the distributor, and some areas where smaller markets have just not had the same priority because they're smaller markets. And the idea is that if you don't feed the larger market, then the demand will die down, and that could overall affect adoption of the game. I would be interested to know if anybody has any numbers anywhere that could shed some light on this, but I suspect that it's probably not the kind of thing that anybody wants out and publicized. Certainly not so that the rival game makers could see it or anything like that.
Got a couple more rules. One that everyone agrees with, I think, except for the people who want to cause trouble. A lone creature in a battle line is a flank creature and is on both left and right flanks.
Yeah, we knew that.
Yep.
Well, some people didn't. Some people like to argue it. A creature that has been stunned can be targeted by a stun effect again, but it doesn't do anything.
That makes sense.
So Smash doesn't have to stun itself if, Smash is a play effect, stun a creature. Smash doesn't have to stun itself if played on a field with only other already stunned creatures.
I'm glad to hear that, because that is an absolute explicit, clear thing. Because I feel like that's one of those ones where misplays, if you interpret the rules differently, would be a lot more common.
Oh yeah, I even in my local meta, we had people on both sides of that fence, so I could see it. I could have seen it going either direction. I'm glad it went the direction that I think is the better way for the game, even though I don't agree with it. I feel like you should stun. If you stun a creature that's already stunned, you're not stunning that creature. So I was in the camp that Smash would have to stun itself. That being said, it's better for the game if Smash, if you're actively playing a card that hurts yourself in the long run, that seems terrible for game design. So I'm glad the way it went.
We've got one more rule that I have on my list. If I missed any, let me know. But I think it's the only other big one. It's not even a big one. Says you may play one non-Logos card for each play of Phase Shift. And it also clarifies something that I think everyone already knew. The non-Logos cards don't have to be played immediately after playing Phase Shift, because Phase Shift says you can play one non-Logos card this turn, not immediately after. But I guess there was some disagreement that if you played 2 Phase Shift, you could still only play one non-Logos cards, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it didn't make sense either.
Yeah, but now it's been clarified that if you have 2 Phase Shift, or if you can somehow pull it off twice, or more than that, I guess, you can play multiple non-Logos cards per turn.
Yeah, that's also a good rule that's a good change.
Yeah.
Rule of 6 is something that I feel like they could assert a little more strongly on occasion, because I like sort of the stacking of effects feels very intuitive to me. You play 2 library accesses, you get library access times 2. You play 2 of phase shifts, you get to do it twice. Like that makes sense and feels very intuitive and easy to grasp to me. So yeah, I think just even asserting that, yeah, they stack, but only up to 6 is a good way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's all I've got on the rulebook changes. There's some other ones in there that are insignificant or really obvious, not even worth discussing, I think. But did I miss anything super good that went down in the rulebook?
No, I think you hit all the good ones.
You covered all the ones that I was familiar with.
Okay. Yep, and it looks like we talked about freaking rule changes for an hour
Yeah,
and a
we
half,
did.
which is our episode, which is good because it's on people's mind. Um, I don't know. Anything else you guys were just like desperate itching to talk about, or should we call it on this one?
I feel like the game just took off. So the age of discovery ending and entering the time of triumph, like that feels both very fast, but also very exciting. Like, I don't know if it's a case of them being like, all right, let's strike while the iron is hot, or if it was always planned to be this way. But man, interesting to see what's going to change.
I'll go back to what Steven said. I think it was Steven. I don't know. Somebody said it. Was that everyone got really excited about? Oh man, it's part two. It's whatever they call it, episode 2, chapter 2, whatever it was. It's the next thing. To me, this really feels like the first thing. Like the era of discovery, whatever. It was kind of this open beta, I guess. And I'm not complaining about it. I have no gripes with it at all. But everyone acting like, oh my gosh, like it's number 2. It's time for the next big thing. It's like, no, I think this is kind of the first thing. It's competitive play isn't even really starting yet. Like we're in the second thing or entering the second thing, and competitive play hasn't even begun really. Chainbound, actual like being recognized by the company. And I'm not complaining about it. I'm just stating that it is interesting, but I think it's more of a like, all right, we're out of the beta and now let's begin.
I can feel you on that.
Which I guess it makes sense in like the wording, the way they phrased it, but that's just kind of my takeaway from it. Like I wasn't super excited about the announcement of the next thing because it seemed like the first thing hadn't begun. So this is kind of the first one in my
Yeah,
mind, at least.
see, the only thing that really like did anything for me for the Keyforge announcements that came out, and like I agree with you. I think this is the first step where like before it was trying to get the game out, showing people the game, getting the hype going for it. The time of triumph is the big step for these guys for the game in general. The only thing that like grabbed me and was like, all right, this is what's going on is the Vault Tour. And we knew it was kind of coming, but them putting down dates and being like exactly where they're going. I bought tickets to Gen Con. I'm still looking for a hotel, so we're going to see if I can keep my tickets for Gen Con, because if I can't find a place to sleep, I'm not going. But it was the big decider that basically was like, yep, I guess I'm going to Gen Con now. And my friends have always gone. I know a couple people who they go every single year without doubts. One of my good friends is a game designer who throws a big party at Gen Con every year. So I've always had incentive to go, but this has been the first year that I've been like, okay, nope, I'm going for this. I want to go to the Vault Tour. I want to get, I don't even want to say I want to get some of the swag, but I really want to see this game in a giant competitive setting in that regard. Um, I think that's the biggest thing for the time of triumph for me is that Gen Con's going to be a real fun time.
I would agree with you in that I was not planning to go to Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle, and now I'm kind of tempted.
Yeah, but isn't that like? Oh no, it's in March. Yeah, you got some time. I was like, isn't that like next month? Like, you got to make a choice quick. Oh wait, no. I don't know. I've never been to Emerald City Comic. I've never been on that side of the country. So
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out, and hopefully they start. With the Chainbound is what I'm really looking forward to. The Vault Tour, it's cool. If you're wanting to shell out a bunch of money for a couple days worth of play, I guess, but that's only. I'm promise I'm not just being a grouchy old man about it. I'm just like stating my honest opinion about it. Is like it's cool, it's interesting, but like how many places is it? 5, 10, something like that. A weekend. It's not a super, not even a newsworthy thing. It seems like it should have been a stop.
12.
12, yeah, that's nothing. I mean, really.
No, but it's all 12 of those spaces are going to be like the big events, and it's covering most of the United States. You got Washington, you got Denver, Atlanta,
Sure,
Columbus,
it's a
Indianapolis,
it
and then
covers
a
it covers a
lot
decent
of
amount,
EU is
and
being
it's a
covered.
it's a quick
Netherlands,
4-hour
Germany,
drive,
Italy,
and only a couple $100 in hotel stays and tickets and this and that to be able to play, Keyforge for a couple days.
Sure. But again, like I said, it's not the only reason I'm going to go to Gen Con. It's just the deciding factor.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my point was more that it just wasn't a particularly, amazing, groundbreaking thing. It seemed they could have appealed to many more people and something more substantial if they had like actually put some dates on chain bound events and stuff like that. Like when your LGS can start doing those actual like real hardy events.
I believe ours is starting the 22nd. I think ours is starting up. We have our tournaments every other Saturday. I believe our first one is going to be the 9th of February. I believe is when our first chain bound is going to start. But I'm not 100%. Please don't quote me on that.
Okay, because I hadn't heard anything about a date when that would open up to people.
I think that opens up when they do the update, which is going to be Tuesday, the app update.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm looking right now just in case, but
okay.
Like I do not have a official my official word for my game store is that they will be going to them quickly. That's the Netrunner group. Let me type in Keyforge, not Netrunner. Thanks.
I feel like the next time we record this podcast, there's going to be a lot to discuss around that app update.
Oh, I definitely agree. Yeah, so chainbound events are a thing that very shortly into the Time of Triumph. And then it goes on to when they're going to get their seasonal and seasonal premium kits. Not on the 22nd, but possibly shortly after that. That is all the information that my local game store is going to give me.
Okay, and that's interesting. I'm curious to see when it'll go live. Everywhere. It might be with the update, and then I guess it's up to the different stores to adapt it. But that's what I'm more interested in than anything out of the whole new, Time of Triumph or whatever it is. It's the actual like beginning of competitive play. Yeah, but that's that. We spent a good hour and 40 minutes talking about rules. Hopefully we shed some light on some stuff if people were not up to date with that new news. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Like always, don't forget to check out thekeyforge.com. We got all sorts of cool articles going up, all sorts of new stuff. We got a forum. We've got a store locator. We've got a podcast section, media section. It's constantly growing. A couple things. If you like the show, do us a huge favor and rate it wherever you listen to it. YouTube, whatever, thumbs up it, comment, subscribe. I don't care. You've heard that before. But if you listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever, throw it however many stars you think is fair. Leave it a review. Because that's how the shows pop up. People search for Keyforge. It's the ones that are like graciously reviewed that pop up. So, we have our Patreon, patreon.com/thekeyforge. If you can't or don't want to throw $1 in our tip jar, that's totally okay. Throw us a bone and leave us a rating and a review. That helps way more than you know. Like like you listening to this who's thinking, I could do that, but I don't know if I will. You should, because it's really helpful. We'd really appreciate it. But other than that, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next week.